All right, so welcome everyone. My name is John Reese. I'm with the Bicycle Alliance of Chapel Hill. We're happy to have you today, and we've worked on this for a while. This webinar will be about an hour, and if you have any questions, please ask them in the chat. We'll monitor the chat, and when we get to the end of the presentation, we will work on answering your questions. If we don't get to everyone's questions, we will put them out into our social media channels. We love questions, so we want to hear from you. And let's see, I'll get started. All right, so let me move to the first slide. And we have two presenters today who are very experienced cyclists. We'll start with Heidi Perot-Perry. Heidi Perry's bicycle advocacy work began in Carrboro in the 1980s when NCDOT proposed widening the three main roads into Carrboro from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. She and many other advocates successfully lobbied for bike lanes and sidewalks on those streets instead, a transformation that's helped reshape Carrboro into the bicycling community it is today. Heidi is a founding member of the Carrboro Bicycle Coalition, BikeCarrboro, and also serves on the board of Bike Walk NC, which is another organization you should know about, and the Orange County Transportation Advisory Board. A bicycle commuter for 40 years, Heidi continues to use her bicycle for transportation, and she is also a league cycling instructor since 2013. Lee has been a resident of Chapel Hill since 1993 and is a founding member of the Bicycle Alliance of Chapel Hill. He has pedaled more than 100,000 miles, mostly as a year-round commuter, for the past 35 years in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, California, and Ontario, Canada. He has much to share about bike safety, having peacefully coexisted with traffic for so long. You may have seen Lee riding along 15501 and NC 54 on his daily commute from Chapel Hill to Morrisville, or at Whole Foods Market, loading his trailer with groceries each week to fuel his rides. Lee has been a league cycling instructor since 2012. And here's Lee at last December's holiday parade, toting a trailer and treats down Franklin Street during the holiday parade. And now I'll pass things on to Heidi.
Thanks. So why are we here today? Well, we have noticed a lot of cyclists on the road, probably because of the pandemic, probably because there weren't as many cars on the road. We certainly know from our friends at the bike shops that everybody is buying a bike right now. In fact, if you haven't already gotten yours, you won't be able to get one because they've sold out. People have pulled their bikes out of the garage, which again, they're fixing them up as fast as they can, but they're also having trouble getting parts for their bikes. You may be a little nervous now that more traffic is coming back on the roads about how to ride in that traffic. You may be new to North Carolina and you're not familiar with the laws in North Carolina. So that's what we're here to talk about. If you've just started biking and you feel like you haven't mastered the bike yet, we're going to show some videos at the end of things you can practice at home to make yourself a little better as a bicyclist and help hone your skills. And I just wanted to go over what to expect in this class. This is based on the League of American Bicyclists 5 Needs to Know for Safer Cycling. There is a class called Smart Cycling, which allows you to have an on-bike portion too. It's about a 5-hour class. It's a great class. But since we're socially distancing, we thought, well, what can we do without that part? So what we have today is an abbreviated version of that. It's going to be about an hour, and we'll answer questions at the end. So with that, bicycling on the road. Here are the 5 things that you need to know. Number 1, follow the law. Number 2, be predictable. Number 3, be conspicuous. Number 4, think ahead. Number 5, ride ready. So we're going to go over each of these now. So moving along, we'll start with following the law. In North Carolina, bicycles are considered vehicles. A bicyclist has the same rights and the same responsibilities as a motorist. He's subject to most of the traffic laws that apply to motorists. A bicycle is not, however, a motor vehicle. That is defined separately by law and is a special class of vehicle. But most traffic laws that govern the rules of movement, like stopping for red lights, slower traffic on the right, those apply to all vehicles. And since the bicyclist is technically the driver of a vehicle, if you also drive a car, a good rule of thumb is to just ask yourself, could I do this in my car? And if the answer is yes, then do it. And if the answer is no, then it's probably not a good idea for you to do it on a bike either. In North Carolina, bicyclists are allowed on all public roads except for fully controlled access highways, such as interstates. And also just note that the laws vary from state to state. What we're going to be talking about here are the laws for North Carolina. Passing laws vary from state to state. Actually, even the definition of a bicycle as a vehicle changes from state to state. So keep that in mind as we go over these laws. These are just for North Carolina. Okay, so to follow the law, you have to know what the laws are in North Carolina. So we're going to go over those briefly. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, behave as the driver of a vehicle. Obey all the traffic signals and the stop signs. Ride with the other traffic. Do not ride facing traffic. I've heard some people tell me, well, I feel safer if I can see the car coming at me. But the truth is that the car is not looking for you there. The person driving that car is looking for you to be a vehicle, just like they are, not a pedestrian. Pedestrians walk facing the traffic. Bicyclists should ride in the same direction as the other traffic. Lighting. Lighting is required at night in North Carolina. You are required to have a front headlamp, a red rear reflector, and a red rear light. The red rear light was added in 2016.
Note, state law says you may wear reflective clothing in lieu of a rear light, provided it is visible from a distance of 300 feet.
Lights are a good idea whenever the visibility is low, if it's cloudy, if it's rainy, but they also can serve a good purpose to make you more visible in the daytime, especially if you're using the flashing mode. For nighttime riding, I like to have a solid light on the front because it helps me see better. You can have a solid or a flashing light on the back. Here's a little tip. If your battery's starting to run low, if you put your lights on flashing, they'll last a lot longer, and maybe till you get home and change the batteries or recharge your bike lights. And just to show you how important having lights is, there's a little chart here. If you look at that line in the middle, the 300 feet, that's what North Carolina law says your lights have to be able to be seen by, a distance of 300 feet. So in column A, you have a bike light, Planet Bike. It's a brand name. It's about 25 bucks, 30 bucks. And you can see that that light makes you visible from as far away as 600 feet. And that even the bargain bike light, which was probably like a $9 Walmart light, you can still see somewhat from 600 feet. But the reflectors, they sort of end around 200 feet. Reflectors are great. If your bike light fails, it will still give the driver behind you some idea that there is something in the road ahead and be able to judge your speed, but they're not an answer to light, so you need the light and the reflector. Turn signals. You're supposed to signal when turning. Here is the way you signal. A left turn, you point your left hand out. A right turn, you put your right hand out. You can also use the old school method where you raise your hand and point your left hand to the sky. And the last picture shows when you're stopping. When you're stopping, you want to bend your arm and point down to the ground. That's really useful if you're riding with other cyclists. It lets them know that you're starting to slow down. It's also good to add a verbal "I'm stopping" if you're riding with other cyclists so that they know that you're slowing down or stopping and they don't run into you. This is also a good thing to practice, getting your hand off the handlebars while you keep your balance. So if you're a new rider, you can start taking your hand off a little bit at a time until you feel comfortable taking it off and making a signal. Pass on the left. North Carolina law says do not pass on the right unless you're in a separate lane. If you are in a separate bicycle lane that goes all the way up to the intersection and then there is a path through the intersection, you can come up beside the cars at a red light. In this photo here, there is no bike lane. And these bicycles are positioned in a very awkward place if they're planning to go straight. That car in front of them could be turning right. And he has no idea that they've come up on him. They could be in his blind spot. Plus, even if they're going straight, even if all these cars are going straight, it's going to make the bikes have to merge into them on the other side or in the middle of the intersection. So a better place to position yourself would be in line with the cars. Helmets. Helmets are required if you're under 16. They're a really good idea if you're over 16 or over. But for a helmet to work, it has to fit right. And Lee is going to show us in a video how that works.
So, helmets. First thing you want to check is make sure you got a helmet that basically fits your head. 2 fingers between the underside of your helmet and your eyebrows is a good fit. If it's more than 2 fingers, your helmet's going to be set up too high and your forehead is exposed. If it's too far down, it's going to interfere with your visibility. I'm going to click it in, and you're going to check to get them adjusted, the straps adjusted right. You just have to do this once. The Y strap that goes below your ear, want to make sure that that's comfortable on both sides. The chin strap, nice and tight. Click it in, and as you can see, it's not moving anywhere. If I pull on it, it doesn't move too much. It's not going to shift in an accident. These straps are tricky to adjust. They're essentially one piece of strapping that runs all the way through all the clips in the helmet and comes out both ends out the other side of your chin strap. So it is tricky to get everything adjusted. You move one spot and it affects the rest of it. So get some help from your shop if you're having trouble. What I don't want to see is, I see this a lot, you see people, even experienced riders, sometimes I see children riding like this with a chin strap that's hanging loose like this. Really dangerous. Your helmet is not going to protect you at all if your chin strap is too loose. This is what's going to happen. You're totally exposed. So if you see someone, say something. What I've done with my strap, once I get it adjusted, I took a piece of needle and thread and I sewed the straps together. I cut off the extra strapping so it doesn't flap around on my face, and I never have to worry about adjusting it again. These chin straps will come loose after a few rides on their own, so that'll prevent that from happening. Okay, a lot of helmets have a dial in the back that you want to adjust. I'll show you on Heidi's here. It's a dial that you turn and it opens and closes this retention strap that goes around here, and it tightens it up to your skull. Some helmets come with extra padding to make sure you have a good fit, but you want to make sure that that's good and tight. Once that's tight, you can see that it's not going anywhere. It's pretty tight on there, not shifting from side to side. And the last thing you want to check is periodically is that your helmet hasn't been damaged. This one here has been in an accident. You can see the plastic shell has delaminated from the styrofoam. There's been an impact there and the styrofoam is crushed. That helmet unfortunately is not usable. This one here was my old one. I had it hanging on the handlebar of my bike. My bike fell over onto the helmet, put a crack in the styrofoam right there, and again, that is unusable.
Thanks, Lee. Okay, so next, as I said earlier, slower traffic stays to the right. A cyclist should ride in the rightmost lane, headed in the direction you're going. Just like slow cars on the highway go in the right lane, you are a vehicle, take the lane that's in the direction you're going. Also, notice the position of this bicyclist. North Carolina law says that bicyclists should ride as close as practicable to the right, but they are allowed to use the full lane when it's safer for them to do so. On this particular photo, you can see that the edge of this roadway has a lot of cracked pavement. It looks like it has some debris, several things that might have made that cyclist want to ride farther away from the edge. Also, just to make them more visible, that lane is not wide enough for a car and a bike to be in the same space at the same time. So this forces the car to slow down and go around in the other lane. Emergency vehicles. again, just like cars, if you hear a siren, pull over and stop. For somebody who's driving an emergency vehicle like a fire truck or an ambulance, they're going super fast and they don't want to guess whether you have pulled over just temporarily or if you're going to be riding back in traffic. So pull over and stop until the first vehicle goes by, and then wait, because sometimes there's more than one. And don't ride your bike while you're impaired. You can get a DWI citation for riding your bike drunk. In North Carolina, you can get that for just about everything, including a lawnmower if it's ridden on public roads. The only way you're safe from that is if you're riding a horse. So just keep that in mind. Yield to pedestrians. So the hierarchy is, motor vehicles, bicycles, pedestrians in terms of vulnerability. So always stop for pedestrians crossing the street at marked crosswalks, but also at unmarked crosswalks. And if you're on greenways and you're trying to pass a pedestrian, slow down to their speed. Let them know that you're coming, either with a bell or audibly saying something so that you don't startle them. Sidewalks. Okay, riding on the sidewalk is dangerous. It can be illegal. It's not illegal on the state level, but lots of municipalities have places where you cannot ride on the sidewalks. And it's not recommended for adults. One reason is because when you're coming out of your driveway, the law says you're supposed to look before you hit the sidewalk, but you're looking for somebody moving at the speed of a pedestrian, not somebody moving fast like a bicyclist. And in this photo, especially dangerous, this cyclist is not only on the sidewalk, he's also going against traffic. So this car is not looking for him there, and it can have deadly results. Very unfortunately, there was a woman in 2014 in Chapel Hill who was killed doing exactly this. So if you're on a sidewalk, you want to slow down to the speed of pedestrians and act like pedestrians. And if you're riding with your kids under 10 can't see as well as adults can. They don't have the peripheral vision. If you ride with them on the road, you can ride on the outside of them and be sort of a buffer between them and the traffic. If you're riding on the sidewalk, again, just slow down and act like pedestrians there, and be very, very careful. Treat every driveway as an intersection. Okay. In 2016, North Carolina legislature passed the Safe Passing Law, and it allows a motorist to cross a double yellow line to pass a cyclist. However, if you want to do this in a no passing zone, you must give either 4 feet of space or completely change lanes to pass. This is also a good time to mention maybe that out on the rural roads, you'll see cyclists riding 2 abreast. That is not illegal in North Carolina. Sometimes it makes cyclists more visible. It gives them more mass on the street. It can also, if there's a group of riders and you're trying to pass them, it can shorten that distance that you have to go to get around them all. So if you're a motorist, just remember, be patient. It doesn't take that long. It's usually just seconds before there's an opening for you to pass the cyclists. Understand that a bike rider doesn't have a 2-ton armor of steel surrounding them like a person driving a car does, and give them space when you go around them. Don't honk. It can startle them. It can cause them to crash, and also don't ride close when you pass them. So that is the passing law. And that is the end of the laws. So now that you know the laws, you can follow the laws. The rest of this will go a lot faster because there aren't a lot of parts to each of these. And just a reminder, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. We'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So number 2 on the things you need to know is to be predictable. In most cases, the best way to be predictable is to follow the law. That's where people are expecting you to be. They're expecting you to signal. That gives them an idea of what you're planning to do, makes your intentions clear. Also, ride in a straight line. Don't be swerving between cars. And I've seen people who ride up on the sidewalk and then back down on the street, and up on the sidewalk and down on the street. That is very confusing to somebody who's following you in traffic. So be consistent, go in a straight line, signal your turns, and check behind you well before you change lanes. How do you change lanes predictably? I'm going to let Lee go over this. Take it away, Lee.
All right, thank you, Heidi. So first off, you should look back and scan for traffic beforehand anytime you signal a lane change or signal a turn. Even if you have neck mobility issues and you can't turn your neck completely, your partially turned head will be a visual cue to anyone behind you that you're planning to make a movement. Now, motorists have mirrors on their cars for rear view scanning. You can also use a mirror on your bike. But while helpful, remember that mirrors are not a substitute for scanning because they have blind spots. So after scanning 100 feet ahead of the lane change or turn, you should give your initial arm signal and hold that signal for 2 to 3 seconds. Then you scan back again before positioning into the lane. Now, if you're turning or stopping at an intersection, you'll want to reduce your speed and downshift. If turning, signal a second time as you approach the intersection. This is important because you're signaling not just to the vehicles behind you, but to those approaching and to the intersection, entering the intersection from all directions. And they probably didn't see your initial signal 100 feet back. You'll need to think about the timing and practice the steps so that you can do the scans and signals and have both hands on your handlebars while lane positioning, applying brakes, and downshifting as you approach the intersection. And finally, look ahead for approaching vehicles and side to side for cross traffic that might turn into your path.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, we've done the first two. We're on to number 3, be conspicuous. In other words, put yourself where you're visible to other people on the road. Ride where the drivers can see you. As a general rule, if you're in traffic where the lane is too narrow for you and the car to both be next to each other, the safest place to be is near the middle of the lane, riding with the other traffic. You want to be a few feet away from the curb and at least 5 feet away if there are any parked cars beside the road. You don't want your view to be blocked. If you're at an intersection and you can't see the cars on the other side of the intersection, they can't see you, so just remember that. Looking at the photo on the right here, you see 2 bike riders on a fairly narrow rural road with a vehicle behind them. You can also tell that there's not room for that vehicle to pass these bicyclists and give them 4 feet of space. However, they can look ahead, and if there's clearing in the lane coming the other direction, they can go in the other lane and pass them. So by moving your body out into the travel lane a little bit, you're letting that car know that whatever he thinks he sees, there is no way for him to get around you in that space, and it'll cause him to make a much safer pass. Other ways to increase visibility: wear bright clothing during the day, wear reflective material at night, use lights at night when visibility is poor, and as we said, even during the daytime, it can make you more visible. Make contact with other road users if you can. Sometimes you can't because it's night. Sometimes you can't because they have tinted windows. But if you can, it's good to make eye contact. And as we talked about earlier, don't ride on sidewalks. It's not where they're looking for you. Lane positioning is a really important part of biking. And if we were doing this as an in-person class, there would be a part where we would go out and do this on streets. Since we can't do that, I just wanted to give you a couple of diagrams to try and help you understand what that means for lane positioning at intersections, because intersections is where most crashes occur. In this slide, we have a single lane. And as we said before, bicyclists ride in the rightmost lane of the direction they're heading. So if there's a single lane, that's the lane you're going to be in regardless. And in this particular image in A, you want to be in the center of the lane. Unless the lane is super wide and there's room, like if you're going straight or left and there's plenty of room for a car to come up on the right and turn right beside you, you can let them do that. But a lot of times the road is not that wide, and so this is a good position for you to be in. If you look at the image in B, there does look like there's almost enough room for the bike and the car, the bike in red, but if that car is turning right, again, you have a conflict there because the bicyclist is not in the right position, and that car is going to cut them off or worse, run into them. A much better place to be when you're approaching that intersection is where the bicyclist in green is. Just get in the lane with the traffic before you get to the intersection. You may have noticed that a lot of bike lanes, especially in this town, end right before an intersection and you have to merge with traffic. Part of that is to help avoid this. Taking the lane when approaching an intersection. So in these two photos, just to point this out a little more, you have the cyclists on the left who have taken the lane. You have the ones on the right who are filtering up beside the car. And the ones in the left are in a much better position to continue straight. No car is going to try to turn right in front of them. Okay, so what if you have a multi-lane road? If you look at the one on figure A, again, you have 3 different lanes with 3 different positions for you to be in. If you're turning left, you should have scanned, signaled, and gone to the left before you got there. If you're going straight, you want to stay in the middle lane. A lot of times what cyclists will do is they'll try to come up beside those cars that are in the middle lane to get a sort of a jump on going straight. But as we talked about earlier, that's going to put them in the wrong position to go straight. And then all the cars that are going straight, they're going to have to try to merge with them before they get across the intersection. So going straight, you want to be in the middle lane. Going right, you want to be in the right lane. Now contrast that to the image in B. Here, the right lane is both a straight lane and a turn lane. So the farthest right lane going in the direction you're going, for both going straight and going right, is the right lane. Notice the difference between those two and where you would place yourself. And I know there are some roads that are just impossible to cross. They have way too many lanes of traffic and way too much traffic. If you feel uncomfortable doing this, you can always, remember, you can always get off the road, go off to the right, and cross the road as a pedestrian at the intersection. You could go straight and then left if you wanted to avoid doing a left turn lane. Just make yourself a pedestrian. That's the great thing about a bike. And roundabouts. The town asked me to talk about roundabouts. We have, if you look at the bottom right, that's where you would be entering the roundabout. You would have already gotten in the lane with the rest of the traffic. You would yield before you cross the pedestrian crosswalk there. And then you would yield again to any cars coming from the left because roundabouts are counterclockwise. And if you follow that line around, you would see the route you would take. When you get into the roundabout, hold your lane. Don't let anybody pass you and don't try to pass anybody. And then before you leave the roundabout, signal your exit. And again, you're going to be crossing another crosswalk, so watch for pedestrians. Number 4 is think ahead. You want to anticipate what motorists are going to do next or other road users. Again, just like when you learn to drive a car, they say drive defensively. If you're on a bike, you see a car parked with a driver in it, ask yourself, could he be getting ready to pull out into traffic? Is that car in front of me going to turn even though he doesn't have a turn signal on? Every driveway, you have to pay attention. Is there a car coming in or out of it? You want to look for debris. You want to look for potholes. You want to look for holes beside storm drains like the one where Lee has positioned his bike. Fortunately, that was a staged shot, so he didn't get hurt there. You want to cross railroad tracks at a right angle, again, because there are little ruts beside the rails and you don't want your wheel to get caught in those. And you want to ride outside the door zone of parked cars, 5 feet away from parked cars. If you're a motorist, again, be prepared for bike riders, children as well as adults, making errors at intersections. Be aware of pedestrians who might be crossing on a right on red. There may be a pedestrian in that crosswalk. Pay really close attention for that. Always be careful around schools, not just around schools, but at school bus stops too. And before we leave this topic, I just want to talk one more time about do not ride in the door zone. A lot of people, a lot of cities in an effort to look like they're bicycle friendly, have put all these bike lanes in the door zones. If you see a bike lane that is in the door zone like these two, don't ride in that lane. Move over to the travel lane. In North Carolina, you don't have to ride in a bike lane if it's on the road. You can ride wherever it's safest. Also, again, if you're a motorist, always look behind you before opening your car door when you're parked. The Dutch have something they call the Dutch reach, and they open their driver's side door with their right hand instead of their left hand, which causes them to turn around automatically and have their body in a position to look back. But either way, just remember, don't ride in a door zone bike lanes, or even if there isn't a bike lane, always be 5 feet away from parked cars. And if you're a driver, always check before you open your door. We are on to our last part of the 5 things you need to know to ride ready before we go into the skills. And I'm going to let Lee take this one.
Thanks, Heidi. First off, I want to mention, since we have this graphic up here, if you're new to riding or shopping for a bike to ride around town, a bike like the one pictured in the screen is equipped with a flat handlebars, can be a safer option for riding in traffic. The handlebars put the rider in a more upright position, facing forward, where it's easier to see and make eye contact with motorists. So your bike needs to be ready to ride before you head out. And to make sure it is, you should perform what the League of American Cyclists calls the ABC Quick Check. A stands for air in the tires and a tire inspection. B is for brake function and adjustment. C stands for crank, chain, and cassette. Q is for quick release, to make sure that your quick release levers are closed on your wheels and brakes, especially if your wheels have been removed for transport. And lastly, check is a test ride to check the functionality, loose parts. So let's go over each part of the ABC Quick Check in this video. Okay, basic bike check. ABC. A stands for air. You're going to check your air pressure. Give it a little squeeze. You want to go, when you inflate your tires, you want to go by the PSI rating range listed on the sidewall of the tire. You don't want to go above the higher end of the range or below the lower range. While you're doing that, check for bald spots. I like to check to see if there's any embedded material, maybe some glass, a piece of wire or a tack or something that you might have picked up on your previous ride that might work its way through and puncture your tire. Look for any other damage, any sidewall tears or threads coming off. B is for brakes. We're going to check 2 things with the brakes. First is the pads. There's little wear bars on the inside of the brake pad that indicate whether your brake pads are worn out. So these ones look fine. They look like they're pretty new. The second thing you're going to check is the distance between the underside of the handlebar and the brake lever. When you give it a squeeze, we go by the rule of thumb. You want to stick your thumb in there and then squeeze down. And if you can't squeeze hard on your thumb, you're good to go. You don't want to be in a situation where you're squeezing hard and your lever maxes out on your handlebar and you lose braking power. Some bikes have coaster brakes, and usually kids' bikes. And to test those, you want to push backwards. There should be it should engage the brake when you're pushing backwards. So C is for chain, cassette, and crank set. So we're going to test this by pedaling backwards, and we're checking the chain for any gunk that might have built up. Make sure it's well lubricated. On the cassette is the rear cluster of gears. We're checking for any debris that might have gotten lodged between the gears that'll throw the chain off. Maybe you picked up a twig or a piece of string on the road got wrapped around there. Make sure it's moving smoothly and not making a lot of noise. Cranks, you want to check your cranks, make sure they're tight, the pedals are on there tight, and then you're good to go. Okay, Q is for quick release, and you've got several of them. You may have several of them on your bike. We'll start with the wheels. Both wheels are either going to have a quick release or a bolt holding the wheel in place. And so if you've taken your wheel off after you've transported your bike, you want to make sure that that wheel is on, centered, and the lever is engaged. You may also find quick release on your brakes. This one's got this style of brake, has a piece that pops the cable out, and you want to make sure that that's engaged back where it's supposed to be. Some have little levers on the end. You want to make sure those levers are down. The other place you might find a quick release is on your seat binder collar. This one has a bolt, but some bikes have a lever like this that you want to crank down real tight so that your seat doesn't hit a bump and drop down real fast. And the last part, you want to check your bike, do a quick test ride, ride it short distance, check that your brakes are functioning, check that your gears are shifting properly, listen for any noise that might indicate a loose part or something that needs to be tightened. Make sure you don't have any loose clothing that might be getting caught in the gears, and that's it.
Thanks, Lee. Okay, you've got your bike, you're riding. A few things to think about taking that will make your ride more comfortable. We've already talked about the helmet and the lights, very important. Sunglasses, obviously a good choice in the summer or when it's really bright, helps with glare. Always carry an ID and your medical information, water bottle, mirror. We've talked about those, bells on the greenway especially, but bells are kind of nice. They're just a quieter way of, they're a more polite way of announcing yourself than saying on your left, yelling out to somebody. So, and then a pump toolkit and a patch kit. So if you have a flat tire, there are a lot of videos online to watch that can maybe help you figure out how to change a tire. But even if you don't know how, if you carry the equipment that you need to have a flat tire changed, a Good Samaritan may stop and be able to help you fix your flat tire. So it's always good to have the equipment, even if you don't know how to use it. And of course, a lock to keep your bike, Keep a cell phone with you if you have one, but don't use it while you're biking. And don't use headphones when you're biking because they can really drown out important information that you need to hear, cues from around the road. And then how to add utility to your bike. So you like riding your bike, you live a half a mile from the grocery store, you want to go get groceries, but you want more than you can carry in your backpack. Here are just a few of the many, many ways you can carry groceries that are all way better than putting the bags on your handlebars where they could hit your spokes, hit your legs, cause you to lose your balance. Panniers, that's what those are called in figure A. A basket is a great thing to have in figure C. You can make your own panniers out of kitty litter containers. There's a lot of information online about how to do that yourself. If you have a bike rack, it adds just with bungee cords, you can hold stuff down. And in E, there's a trailer. If you have kids, that's one way to carry kids, but they have all kinds of trailers. You can also use a kid's trailer for groceries, or you can use one that's more appropriate for groceries. But just remember that there are a lot of ways to expand the utility of your bike and make it a good alternative to the car for short trips, running errands. Okay, so now we're to the part about bicycle basics. These are some things you need to know when you are starting out on a bike. And I highly recommend you go to bikeleague.org. They have some excellent instructional videos there. Getting on and off your bike. Starting and stopping sounds so simple, but it's actually I think one of the harder things to get the hang of. Starting and stopping is something you need to be sure you're comfortable with. Riding in a straight line. Scanning, and by that we mean looking behind you, looking around you, make sure you're entering a space that's clear. Signaling, we talked about earlier. And shifting, shifting means you put it in a lower gear when you're going uphill and a higher gear when you're going downhill. You want to be able to have some power on your pedal strokes without spinning out, but you want to be able to get up the hill. So with that, there are these great videos at bikeleague.org, but since we had Lee doing videos, we asked him if he would do a couple for these. So the first one is to show you how to practice starting and stopping.
Starting and stopping. To start, position your pedal slightly forward of straight up at about a 45-degree angle while straddling the bike, with your bottom in front of the saddle and not on it. Next, push down hard on the lifted pedal, using it as a step to lift yourself up and onto the saddle. Your downward stroke will also help propel the bike forward, allowing it to pick up speed. As you mount the saddle, place your other foot on the pedal and start pedaling. To stop the bike, get your feet ready by moving your pedals to the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock position. Shift your weight to the pedal that's in the down position. Squeeze both brakes gently, slide off the seat, and put your other foot down, tilting the bike slightly to that side as you do.
That was great. And now another one to practice how to ride in a straight line and how to scan. And these are things you can do in your parking lot or on your side street if it's a quiet street. Go ahead.
To practice going in a straight line, simply set up 2 rows, either with chalk or other markings, 3 feet apart, and practice riding between them. Here I have used several tennis balls cut in half. For scanning, use the same 2 rows of markings. Have someone hold up fingers or colored cards. When that person calls "scan," look back and call out the number of fingers or the color of the card while trying to hold a straight line between the 2 markers. Keep practicing. Lifting your left hand can aid you in keeping a straight line. And remember to always scan and look behind you before signaling and changing lanes on the road.
So the last thing we're going to go over here before we get to questions is learning how to ride and teaching your child how to ride. And there are some really good videos online that I think do a better job than I can do here in a minute and a half. REI has a really good one for kids that I recommend that you look at. But I will go over basically what I do when I take someone out to teach them how to ride. I take them to a place with an incline that is very slight, just enough to get the bike moving without having to pedal. When my kids were little, I think I took them to the ballpark and I had them on the pitcher's mound, just that little bit of an incline. Sometimes a little more than that's necessary. And just get them to practice almost like you're on a balance bike. Put the seat really low so you can put both feet flat on the ground. That gives the rider a feeling of great control. And have them just go as far as they can without putting their feet down. Sometimes they'll try over and over, put their feet down, pick them up, put them down, pick them up. Once they've got that part, then they can start trying to pedal. Then they can start trying to squeeze their brakes gently so they feel how they stop. They can start practicing stopping and getting off of the bike. And there are also ways that you can practice all these things. We showed you a few just now for starting and stopping and scanning. With kids, you can make it fun. You can draw with chalk a giant figure 8, and they can practice riding around those curves. You can put up a little obstacle course, maybe with little cones or with chalk that they can ride in and out of the cones. The best way to look for those resources is to go to a place that has bike rodeos and see what they suggest for setting up a bike rodeo, and then just do one in your front yard, in your road if it's quiet, or parking lot, or go to the school and do it. Right now there's nobody at the schools. The parking lots are great places to practice these things. And if you're an adult and you're trying to learn to ride, there are some sources online for that too. Hopefully, when we get back to a non-pandemic state, we can do some of those in person. You can always send us a note and let us know that you have some interest in that. And while we're queuing up the questions, if you could put it to the last slide. So here's the information for BikeCarrboro. You can follow us on Twitter at BikeCarrboro. You can follow Bike Chapel Hill at Bike Chapel Hill. I'm also on the board of Bike Walk NC, which is a statewide group. We're the ones who helped get that safe passing law in 2016. And it's a great nonprofit organization. We put on a summit every year. We're putting it on in November this year, November 6th and 7th, I think. And then on the national level, Bike League, bikeleague.org is a great organization. They work hard for federal funding and federal legislation that makes it safer to ride bikes. So all good organizations, put them all down. So we have a little time left for some questions. Do we have any questions?
Oh, yeah. Let me start with the first question. Somebody mentioned, and this was in regards to your advice on getting into the left lane to make turns or to not to filter in traffic. There was a concern that getting into the left lane seems to be a quick way to get hit.
Okay, so remember what Lee was saying. You want to start 100 feet before that intersection to move over. You want to make sure that you've got plenty of time to get over to the left lane. You don't want to wait till the last minute. So if you're on a road with 3 lanes and you need to get to the left lane, you're going to start pretty far back looking for a break in the traffic. And then you'll go over, if you're off of the first lane, you want to get in the middle of the right lane first, look back, move over to the middle lane, look back, move over to the left lane. It does take a little longer than it does with a car. But again, that is where people are looking for you. If you're going to turn left, you have to be in the left lane. So start really far back to make your plan. Like I said, you can always ride in the middle of the lane. So if you're making a left turn, go over to the left turn and ride in the middle of that lane up to the intersection. I know it can be frightening, but you know, there's the intersection at Estes and Greensboro Street. I don't know if you all are familiar with that. I would have people who would be riding with me through that intersection, and they would go all the way over to the right on North Greensboro after they passed Estes Drive. And they would always tell me they were terrified that cars were going to hit them when they came through. And it was because they were giving the car just enough room to think that he had room to pass them. Whereas if that rider was over in the middle of the lane, the driver would know he'd have to wait until he got past that little bottleneck, and then he could pass him with lots of ease.
That's a good point, Heidi. I would just add that you want to practice these maneuvers, scanning and signaling to move over 1 or sometimes 2 lanes to get into that left turn lane on a lower volume traffic road, where it's easier to learn the technique. And then as you feel more confident, you can do the busier roads, that maybe the 35, 40, 45 mile an hour roads with a little more planning, like you said, to and at a faster speed.
Okay. All right, let me go to the next question. A question was, for the question, where do you mostly running? A true beginner may not be able to even answer the question. Could you give definitions for the terms you used? I think the only 2 I recognized were the striped lane in the road and the greenway. This is in regards to the poll about where do you ride a bicycle.
Yeah, let me look at that question. A greenway is like the American Tobacco Trail or the Bowling Creek Greenway. A separated bike path, we don't have any of those that I know of right around here, but some cities do have a path that runs right next to the road, as opposed to a greenway, which can go off the road through the woods or somewhere else. A separated bike path usually runs parallel to the road. And then a bike lane is usually just paint. They've taken part of the road and painted it as a space for bicycles. There's also a protected bike lane, and you'll see some of those, they have barricades. There's a small one on Rosemary where they put up little delineators between the traffic and the bike lane. So that's considered a protected bike lane. But I understand your problem with all those different terms. I apologize for not clarifying them.
Okay, let's see here. The next question was, do you ride with traffic when approaching an intersection or always?
It's always. You want to ride with traffic at all times, not just when you're approaching an intersection.
I think what the question was do you want to ride in line with traffic, maybe, as opposed to riding on the right edge? I'm not sure, but, and to that I would say, you know, like I said earlier, if the road is wide enough for you and the car to ride next to each other, of course you don't want to be going 10 miles an hour while the car behind you is trying to go 35 all the way down the road, if there's room for both of you next to each other. But once you get to the intersection, you want to be sure you've merged over into the right position to take, and then the car will just have to, you know, it'll have to wait for a minute or two.
Well,
sometimes
even
you
seconds.
hear people say that, or seconds. Yeah, I'm sorry, not minutes, seconds. I know that it's intimidating when you're out there, the car might be beeping at you or something. Just know that that is the safest place for you to be when you reach the intersection, is in line with the other traffic.
Right. And you need to signal in advance that you're moving over, even if you're repositioning yourself within the lane as you're approaching the intersection. So the sooner you do that, the safer it is for you.
And can I just add something? And just to be clear, also, the Bike League has a much more detailed instruction class. You have to pay for it, but it's worth it if you have plans, for example, especially to be a bike commuter every day. It's definitely worth your time and effort to seek out a class like that, where you'll get much more vigorous and more thorough education for how to do things like this.
For those people in Carrboro, I'll tell you one place that this is really obvious. If you're going into town and you're on North Greensboro Street, just before you get to the Harris Teeter, the bike lane ends. And that is when you have to be thinking before the bike lane ends, right? Because you know you're going to have to merge with traffic. So a little ways before that, you need to start looking back and then signaling so the car behind you knows that you're going to be merging in front of them.
A lot of folks are afraid to move into the center of the lane. They feel that someone's going to come up from behind and rear end them. That's not a real common accident. You're as Heidi said, the traffic in front of you at the intersection is much more of a concern, and you do have full right to have full control of the lane. It says so on page 95 of the driver's manual, so you can bring that up if anyone wants to argue that point.
It's not necessarily a good thing to argue with people these days in their cars, but I mean, many of us have been riding for decades, and as scary as some of this stuff sounds, the fact that we're still here talking to you, speaks volumes. This is a safety question. Do you have any tips for what you do if your brakes give out while you're riding down a hill or fast? This is this particular person's biggest fear, so they just want to know what they could possibly do if for some reason they've lost their brakes.
Well, your bike doesn't have an emergency brake, so your best bet is to do that quick check, make sure your brakes are functioning properly before each ride. And also keep in mind that you do have two brakes, one on the right, one on the left. I think it's the left controls the front brake, your left brake lever, and your right controls the rear. You want to brake the rear slightly ahead of the front so that you don't brake down hard on the front only and flip over your handlebars if your brakes are real grabby. But I've never been in a situation where I've lost control of my brakes and had to bail on the side of the road. It does sound like a dangerous situation. Just make sure.
Yeah, well,
you're in tune.
I can add, I mean, sometimes you have to, when something really is catastrophically failing, you kind of have to make the decision of the best of the two evils. And this is something that, I've encountered in mountain biking. Sometimes it's better just to simply eject yourself from your bicycle. And we don't have time to explain that in detail, but if you're accelerating down a hill and there's no way to control your bike anymore, it's time for you and your bike to part ways. You're going to get scraped up. Hopefully you're wearing a helmet, but obviously if there's an intersection down at the bottom of the hill, that could lead to some even more serious injuries. The good news is it doesn't happen very often. If you're worried about your brakes, the best way to make sure that you don't have to worry about your brakes is to get your bike to a shop and have them looked at. If the bicycle hasn't been ridden in a while, it is a fair thing to be concerned about because brake cables can rust and they can break. I've never had one happen, but it can happen. And so get your bike checked up. And the bike mechanics, we have several good shops around here. They will make sure that your brakes will not fail you. We have a question here. I don't know how much time we have left here, but someone asked about how joining meetup. I asked that. Here's a question about going uphill. It's specifically about gearing, and essentially this person is new to cycling. And I've read that you should shift to a lower gear and going uphill, but it seems like I'm hardly moving at times and lose momentum because of decreased speed.
So I saw there was another question about what is a cassette, and I think these are related. If your bike is a multi-geared bike, if you're going uphill, you want the cassette is the collection of gears on the back of your bike on your rear wheel, and the crank and the chain rings are the gears on the front of your bike on the pedals. And so to go up a hill, you want the front one to be on the smallest ring and the back one to be on the largest ring. So first be sure you've got it truly in the low gear. And to go downhill, you'll have it be the opposite. You'll have the big ring in the front and the small ring in the back. You know, sometimes bikes aren't geared low enough for a person, but that's not always, usually it's just that they aren't using the gears right. So some bikes have 3 sets of gears on the front, 3 chain rings on the front. The smallest one is sometimes referred to as a granny gear because it makes it easier for the old folks to get up hills. But some bikes only have 1 chain ring on the front, and sometimes that's not going to give you enough range to get up certain hills, and you might need to add another chain ring. But I'll let Lee weigh in too.
Yeah, the only thing I would suggest is anticipate the hill and downshift in advance of approaching the hill. I even do this in my neighborhood. It's very hilly, and if I shift too late, you wind up just kind of stuck there, not being able to push that pedal over. So you want to just anticipate when you need to shift is the main thing.
Well, and also I think more close to the question is, when you switch your gearing to the point where you feel like you're spinning very quickly and you're going nowhere, that's the beauty of a bicycle. The gearing allows even the less fit people, if their bicycle is geared well enough, to climb some pretty steep hills. It will take longer. There's no way to get around that other than becoming stronger or getting an e-bike. I think the biggest thing is as you ride more, you'll get more comfortable, because what happens is that when you're climbing up a hill in a climbing gear, you seem to be expending a lot of work for almost not much forward movement. And part of it is because your pedaling is not as efficient as it will get as you ride more. As you're pedaling that's smoother, the side-to-side motion and the concern about your stability will go away as you become more confident and more skilled at pedaling your bike, the crank smoothly.
And John, I just wanted to mention one other thing, because there was a private message to me, but somebody, it looks like they left, and I just want to make sure they hear the answer. They asked about what if the child is too heavy for a bike or doesn't have the balance capabilities of being on a bike. And I worked for a few years. We aren't doing it right now because of the pandemic, but the Special Olympics group in Chapel Hill works a lot with youth, and adults of lesser abilities on cycling. And so my suggestion to that person would be to maybe remove the pedals and start out making the bike like a balance bike and let them use the bike that way. There are some people who, because of physical disabilities, just will not be able to do that. We have a good friend, as you know, who had a massive stroke and is not able to balance a bike that way anymore. There are recumbent tricycles that people can look at if balance is an issue. I think the recumbent bicycles are much more stable than the sort of upright tricycles that you sometimes see at the beach and places. But anyway, I just wanted to give that as a possibility. If a person's having trouble balancing, you can take the pedals off of the bike and basically you have a balance bike. You can do it for someone of any age, really.
Okay, a question I had that was sent to me privately. When riding in groups, this is related to more recreational cycling. When riding in groups, is it okay to ride side by side, or is a single file line recommended?
So as I said earlier in the presentation, riding side by side is not illegal in North Carolina. You are allowed to ride two abreast. It does make bicyclists more conspicuous, so it makes them more visible because they're taking up more space on the road. It's a sort of a give and take thing. I mean, you don't want to keep going side by side. Sometimes you're riding side by side, a car comes up, you might move into single file to make it easier for them to see around you all the way if there are only 3 or 4 of you, but if there are 10 or 15 of you, it makes it harder. If you get single file, then you've got this really long line that they have to get around. So it's just kind of a give and take. Sometimes I like to take the lane, especially out on the county, if it's in an unsafe place for a pass, like a hill or a curve. And then once the road straightens out and you can see far ahead, I pull over. I let the car go around me. So it's kind of a give and take, but I'll let Lee weigh in too.
I find that if most of my riding has been solo in traffic, and so I'm always single file with myself. Yeah, out in the country, group riding is a whole different kind of skill. To me, it's always been, if there's a lot of traffic, prefer to be single file to let the cars pass. If you do have a large group, it's better to break that group up a little if there's a lot of traffic, so that the cars are passing smaller groups of you at a time. But that's all I have to add.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of reinforce what Lee is saying. I mean, the pandemic, of course, has changed how we ride in groups. But before it, I would ride in groups of fairly large numbers, but oftentimes I'd ride in groups of like 5 or 6. When there's 5 or 6 of us riding, and we're riding together, if we ride in side-by-side pairs, that means that the length of us that a motor vehicle has to pass is only 3 bicycle lengths, as opposed to 6. And that can be on a windy road, that can be more difficult and take longer. But at the same time, there are circumstances where we make a decision as we're riding to do what we call single up, where we get in single file. And there's the reasons why we normally pick that is when we're making a transition onto a fairly busy road. And there are times when it really is a good idea. I know to new cyclists, this sounds like the scariest thing in the world. But moving out into the road farther than the right-hand side and having 2 does make you much more visible, especially on country roads, because you kind of blend in with the mailboxes and other things on the side of the road, unless you've got a light and are wearing visible clothing. Especially on tight turns, cars will try and pass you, and there's not enough room. And if a car is halfway around the turn and halfway past you, and there's a car coming in a direction, the motorist, the driver of the car, will panic, and they'll just instinctively move over to the right because they don't want to hit that car that's coming. But of course, that's where you are. And so the best way to avoid a circumstance like that is not to even allow that to happen. Of course, motorists sometimes think that cyclists are being pushy or entitled in those circumstances, but we're just trying to share space and be alive. Most of the time in city driving, city bicycle riding, I would agree that single file is okay, but you might have seen in some of those the slides with passing on the right, people will get into a single file row and they'll sneak past cars on the right. Don't ever do that. Very, very bad. So that's all I have to say about the single file versus riding in groups. There were a few more questions here about other groups in the area. I did post a link to the Bicycle Alliance's meetup group, and I posted for the links for organizations that are outside of our realm. There's a really good group in Raleigh called Oaks and Spokes. Very interested. Someone's writing on my screen here. Oaks and Spokes is a great group in Raleigh, and then also Bike Durham in Durham are also great. So I think we've come to the end of our time. Thanks for sharing your late lunch with us, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. I'm going to be ending the WebEx now.